On a stormy afternoon in a prestigious international school, a young girl is trapped in a stalled elevator. In the dark, a stranger's calm voice in flawless French guides her to breathe again. Hours later, in a glittering gala hall, she stuns the room by pointing to that very man, a humble maintenance worker and war veteran, when asked to choose her new French teacher. No one could have predicted what would happen next. If you believe in stories where kindness breaks barriers and changes lives, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe and join us as we uncover the journey that turned an unexpected meeting into something truly life-changing. Rain hammered the glass facade of Harborview International School. Thunder rolled over the bay like a slow drum. The hallways were a blur of wet umbrellas, rubber soles, and end-of-day chatter. Then the power hiccuped, lights dipped. A metallic groan shuddered through the spine of the building. Somewhere between the third and fourth floors, an elevator seized and went still. Inside, Kira gripped the railing. Her palms were damp and cold. The car hummed with a thin electric whine. The overhead light flickered to a dim, nervous glow. She was 11. Small shoulders in a navy cardigan, a violin case knocking lightly against her knee. She tried the buttons with quick jabs. Nothing moved. Air felt heavy. Her chest rose too fast. She thought of open stairs and wide windows. There were none. The car tightened around her like a closing fist. From the darkness beyond the panel, a voice came steady and low. It spoke French first, almost like a lullaby. Respire, petite. Comme souffler les bougies d'anniversaire. The vowels were warm, the consonants soft enough to catch. Then, in English, calm as a hand on the back. Breathe in for 4, out for 6, like blowing out birthday candles. I'm right here. Kira turned toward the speaker grill. Her lip trembled. She followed the count. 4 in, 6 out. Again. With each breath, the elevator seemed to widen. The air opened a notch. The voice continued. Not loud. Never hurried. Tell me what you can feel. 5 things. She pressed her fingertips to the cool steel. Metal. The strap of my case. The edge of the floor. My sweater. My necklace. Good. Now 4 things you can hear. She listened. The pulse in her ears softened. The hum. The rain. Your voice. My breath. Perfect. 3 things you can see. The buttons, the light, the seam of the door. 2 things you can smell. Rubber. Lemon cleaner. 1 thing you can taste. Mint. I had a mint after lunch. There you go, the voice said. A faint smile lived inside the words. You're doing fine. A crackle. A knock at the outer door. Tools chimed against metal. Maintenance, the voice called. Name's Mason. We're going to bring you out slowly. Slow is smart. Can you tell me your name? Kira. Kira, I like that. I'm going to wedge this door. You'll see a stripe of light. Nothing sudden. Keep breathing with me. He worked a bar into the seam. The car gave a reluctant sigh. A bright blade of hallway light cut across the floor. Through the gap, she saw a man's forearms and a blue work shirt with a stitched name. Mason, a pencil behind one ear, rain dots on the sleeves. He looked in. Not commanding, not tentative, simply present. Hi, Kira, he said. He kept his hands where she could see them. I'll brace the threshold. You'll step to me. Left foot first. There's a tech behind you if you want a steady hand on your elbow. She nodded. He guided her with quiet words. She climbed through. Soles found tile. Knees softened with relief. The storm rattled the windows. Somewhere, a teacher shouted directions. The building exhaled. Kira did too. She glanced up. Mason's eyes were the color of wet bark. Steady. Unhurried. There were creases at the corners, the kind that belong to men who have squinted into sun and wind, not to men who live under fluorescent lights. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was thin but sure. "You used a nice voice." He shrugged. A corner of his mouth turned. "It's the effective one. The mean voice is for stubborn vacuum cleaners." The tech laughed. The tension broke. The moment held. The principal came fast with apologies. A security officer radioed. A nurse checked Kira's pulse. Everything turned procedural. Mason stepped back. He reseated the panel. He wiped rain off the threshold with a folded towel. He nodded once to Kira. Then he was gone, a blue shirt disappearing as easily as mist. By evening, the storm moved inland. The city rinsed and gleamed. The Haviland room at the Bayfront Hotel flickered with glass and silver. A white piano painted the air with elegant chords. This was the Hale Foundation Gala. Black ties and simple pearls. People who could write checks with the same hand that raised auction paddles. Catherine Hale, the billionaire CEO behind the foundation, stepped onto the stage. Silver dress. Posture that said she had survived investors, and headlines, and nights when grief rose like a tide. Cameras angled. Conversations softened into a hush. "Thank you for being here," she began, voice measured, gracious. "Tonight we raise funds for classrooms that teach languages, not just for travel, but for empathy. In our home, language is the bridge we cross to meet one another." Her gaze touched down where Kira sat with her violin teacher. The girl's cheeks had color again. Her shoulders were set. Catherine smiled. That small, proud kind a mother gives herself permission to wear in public exactly once. The host returned to the microphone. Banter, applause, another donor thanked. Then a planned moment, a gentle piece of theater for a generous room. "Catherine," the host said, "your daughter is beginning French this term. Rumor says you have gathered quite the short list of tutors." Laughter, polite. Catherine nodded. "5 exceptional candidates," she said. "We value excellence, but we value fit even more. Kira has a voice in this, because children deserve a voice in the shape of their learning." Heads nodded. A few guests exchanged looks that said this was smart optics. Others heard a deeper chord. The host leaned forward. "So, Kira, if you had to pick tonight, whom would you choose?" It was meant to be charming, an unscripted flourish that would end with a smile and a promise to decide later. Kira stood, small against the banquet lights, composed in a way that looked older than 11, but felt perfectly her. Her words were clear, unhurried, no wobble. "I already met the French teacher I want. He helped me breathe when the elevator got stuck. He spoke to me in French. He told me slow is smart." A ripple moved through the room. Something like embarrassment or surprise. It was hard to tell. Catherine's face did not change, but her ribcage felt tight. "What is his name?" the host asked, still cheerful, perhaps less sure. "Mason," Kira said. "He works maintenance at my school. He used a nice voice. I trusted it." Silence pressed in. Then the low chatter returned, sharper. At table 12, a banker tilted his head. Interesting. At table 4, a board member frowned. Risky. At table 7, a journalist underlined the word maintenance. A story pitched itself in the space between sips of sparkling water. Catherine lifted a hand. The room quieted. She looked first at her daughter, then at the guests, then at the cameras which waited to tell this moment how to feel. "My daughter had a hard day," she said. The truth anchored her tone. A stranger helped her without asking who she was. He asked what she needed. He spoke to her with respect, in 2 languages. That is the beginning of a good teacher. Credentials matter. Character matters more. Some faces softened, others calcified. The host tried to glide forward. The piano player found a brighter key, but the current of the evening had shifted. Everyone knew it. Backstage, under a rack of extra linens and a stiff potted fern, Catherine caught Kira's hands. "You surprised me," she said, not scolding, simply honest. "I know," Kira answered. She studied her mother's eyes the way children do when they are testing not the rules, but the person who made them. "You always say we hire people who fit our family. I think he fits. He talked to me like I was brave, not small." Catherine pictured a blue work shirt, a steady bar prying open a door, a voice that had quieted panic instead of magnifying it. Her world contained chairpersons and architects and attorneys who drafted letters that could change a life with 3 sentences. It did not often include men who wiped rain off a floor before walking away. She felt the tug between image and integrity, between what she could defend in an annual report and what she wanted her daughter to remember about being human. In the main hall, the auction launched with vintage wines and box seats. A billionaire promised to match gifts for a robotics lab. Phones glowed with mobile bids. Catherine returned to the stage. She thanked donors. She announced a new scholarship for language teachers in underserved districts. She did her job, with poise, with grace. The part of her that built empires remained intact. The part that had once been a teacher's wife listened to a child's clear preference and was unwilling to dismiss it as a charming mistake. When the orchestra shifted to a standard and the crowd drifted toward dessert, a young reporter with precise eyeliner approached. "Ms. Hale, will Mason be on your short list?" Catherine paused just long enough to be certain of her words. "He is now," she said. The reporter smiled. A headline formed like a storm cell. Somewhere beyond those chandeliers, tomorrow sharpened its pencil. Outside, the rain had dwindled to a mist. Taxis lined the curb. The city smelled like wet stone and maybe hope. In a service corridor across town, Mason hung his shirt on a hook. The blue fabric steamed faintly in the heat. He rubbed a thumb over the stitched name, the habit of a man who owns few things and keeps them in working order. He did not know about the gala, nor the gasp that followed Kira's announcement. He knew an elevator was back online, that a child had steadied her breath, that he had said the line his mother once used on him when thunder folded the night in half. He turned off the light. The corridor fell quiet. Slow was still smart. The morning after the gala, the story had already begun to spread. It started with a shaky cell phone clip from the event. Kira's small figure on the stage, her clear voice saying Mason into the microphone, and the stunned silence that followed. By sunrise, the clip had been shared across local news stations and 2 national morning shows. The captions varied, but they all carried the same hook. Billionaire CEO's daughter picks school janitor as French teacher. In Catherine Hale's office, 40 floors above the bay, the air smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked paper. She stood at the wall of glass, looking out over the city, her phone buzzing with back-to-back messages. Her assistant, Claire, entered with a tablet in hand. "I pulled what I could on Mason Carter," she said. "He's not exactly anonymous, but he's kept his life quiet." Catherine turned from the window, her expression set. "Tell me." Claire read from the file, her voice even. "Former U.S. Marine, served 10 years, fluent in French, taught it as part of specialized military training for joint operations. Honorable discharge, but..." She hesitated. "There was an incident in Kabul. A mission went wrong. 3 of his unit didn't make it. He wasn't at fault according to the official report, but the weight of it stayed with him," Catherine finished quietly. Claire nodded. "After he came home, he divorced his wife, lost custody of his daughter. She's 13 now, lives with her mother in Oregon. He's been in Harborview for 3 years, works maintenance at the school, does some repair work on the side, rents a small apartment near the docks. No debt, no criminal record." Catherine took the tablet, scanning the clipped sentences. a man who had led in dangerous places, now fixing flickering lights and squeaky doors. She wondered how many people at the gala could have balanced both worlds. "Schedule a meeting," she said. "I'll speak to him directly." Mason arrived at the Hale Foundation's conference room, wearing clean jeans and a pressed work shirt. He had shaved, but a faint shadow clung to his jaw. His handshake was firm, but brief. "I appreciate you coming," Catherine began, gesturing toward a chair. "Kira spoke highly of you." Mason gave a small shrug. "She had a rough moment. I just talked her through it." "You did more than that," Catherine said. "You spoke to her in French, calmed her, earned her trust. I'd like you to be her tutor." He leaned back, shaking his head slightly. "Ma'am, I'm not the right fit for your world. I don't own a suit. I don't network over champagne. I fix things with a wrench, not with words," she offered. He met her eyes. "Not with the kind of words people in your circle expect." Catherine's tone softened. "It's not my circle you'd be teaching. It's my daughter." Mason's gaze drifted toward the window, the city spread below. "I taught before, in the Marines, but that was different. My life now is simple for a reason." "Because it's safer," Catherine said quietly. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "And because I know where I belong. Your daughter deserves someone who lives in her world." Catherine opened her mouth to reply, but the door creaked. Kira stood there, clutching her backpack. "I don't want anyone else," she said. Mason's jaw tightened. "Kid, there are a lot of great teachers out there." "I don't care," she interrupted. "You didn't talk to me like I was a problem to fix. You made me feel brave. That's what I need." Catherine watched the exchange, feeling the tug of something both parental and human. Mason didn't answer right away, but she saw the flicker in his expression, the memory of a daughter's voice, perhaps. "I'll think about it," he said finally, standing to leave. By afternoon, the media had seized the story. A morning anchor with perfect hair called it a heartwarming twist that challenges our ideas of status. A panel on a business network debated whether Catherine was making a statement or risking her brand. On social media, the reaction split down the middle. One tweet read, "Finally, someone who values character over credentials." Another scoffed, "Nothing like a billionaire playing savior with the help." Talk radio hosts filled airtime with arguments. Was this a genuine act of humility or a calculated PR move? The phone lines lit up with callers who had known a Mason in their own lives, and others who insisted billionaires and janitors didn't mix except in fairy tales. By evening, paparazzi had staked out the school, hoping for a glimpse of the man at the center of the storm. Mason ignored them, slipping out the side door with his toolbox. He didn't read the articles. He didn't watch the clips. But he felt the shift, how the hallways grew quieter when he passed, how the conversation stopped just a beat too late. At home, he reheated leftover stew and called his daughter. She told him about a science project, about a new friend at school, and about a stray cat she was trying to feed. He listened, smiling in the half-light of his small kitchen. When she asked if he'd been in the news, he said, "Just a misunderstanding. Nothing important." But long after they hung up, Mason sat with the phone in his hand, the sound of Kira's voice still in his ears, and the uneasy truth that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't something he could walk away from. The Saturday morning air was crisp, the kind that carried the faint smell of damp leaves and distant coffee carts. Catherine had chosen the park for a reason. It was open, public, far from the glass and steel formality of her office. She hadn't told Mason this would be a lesson. She hadn't even asked him. She'd simply called to say, "Kira will be at Greenfield Park at 10. You should drop by." Mason almost didn't. He told himself it was a setup, another maneuver from a woman used to getting her way. But at 9:58, there he was, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, boots scuffing the path as he approached the pond. Kira sat on a bench, swinging her legs, a notebook in her lap. When she saw him, her whole face lit up. "You came." He gave a small smile. "Couldn't let you study French all alone, could I?" Catherine, seated a short distance away with a takeaway coffee, pretended to scroll through her phone. In truth, she was watching, measuring his every move. They began with the basics: colors, greetings, how to ask for directions. Mason didn't just drill words. He anchored each one to something tangible. He picked up a red maple leaf from the ground. "Rouge," he said, holding it out. "Not just the color. It's a word with texture. Say it like you can taste it." Kira mimicked the sound, rolling the R until it made Mason nod. When a dog trotted past, its owner jogging behind, Mason gestured toward it. "Chien. Try it." "Chien," Kira repeated, giggling when Mason barked once for emphasis. They moved from bench to path, weaving French into the rhythm of the park. The vendor's cart became un chariot, the fountain une fontaine. Kira soaked it in like sunlight. Half an hour in, a woman's voice cracked the calm. "Please, has anyone seen a little white terrier?" An elderly woman stood near the playground, her hands trembling around a frayed leash. Mason was moving before he thought, his marine instincts quick but calm. "What's his name?" he asked. "Benny," she said, eyes wide with panic. "He's deaf. He won't hear me calling." Mason knelt slightly, bringing himself to her level. "Okay. Which way did he go?" She pointed toward a cluster of bushes by the pond. Mason turned to Kira. "Come on. This is part of today's lesson." They searched together, Mason explaining in low tones how to scan for movement, where dogs might hide when frightened. Kira followed his lead, eyes sharp. Minutes later, she spotted a flicker of white near a bench. "There." Mason crouched, extending a hand slowly, murmuring to the dog until it inched forward. He scooped Benny up gently, the terrier licking his chin. When they returned him to the woman, she clasped Mason's hand with both of hers. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done." Mason only smiled. "Just glad we found him." Kira, still catching her breath, looked up at him. "You didn't have to help her. We were in the middle of class," he shrugged. "Some lessons can't wait. Patience, observation, respect for someone else's worry. Those are worth as much as any word I can teach you." They returned to the bench, but the mood had shifted. Kira's questions became softer, more curious. "Did you ever teach like this before?" Mason hesitated. The sound of the fountain filled the gap. "Yeah, once. I used to teach my daughter. We'd walk through parks, just like this. I'd slip French into everything, make her laugh when she got it wrong." Kira tilted her head. "Where is she now?" He stared at the red leaf still in his hand. "With her mom. It's been a long time since I've seen her." "Why?" Mason's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "Sometimes grown-ups mess things up. Sometimes the world decides for you. I write to her, though. Every birthday, every holiday. I hope she reads them." Kira was quiet, sensing the weight in his words. She tucked that detail away, the way children do when they know it matters. From her bench, Catherine had seen the whole thing. The effortless way Mason wove language into life. The way Kira listened, as if every word mattered. But more than that, she had seen how the girl watched him after the lost dog, like she was learning something no textbook could teach. When they finished, Mason walked Kira back toward Catherine. "She's a quick learner," he said simply. Catherine thanked him, but Mason waved it off, turning toward the exit. "Don't make a habit of this, Hale. I'm not your project." Yet Catherine caught the way he glanced back at Kira, and the way Kira gave him a small wave that lingered long after he'd gone. The story broke on a Wednesday morning, tucked between headlines about the market and the mayor's latest press conference. At first glance, it looked like just another rumor, but the headline was designed to burn into the eye. Billionaire CEO hires janitor with military violence record to teach daughter. By noon, it was everywhere. News sites, talk radio, gossip blogs. Some reworded it, some added unconfirmed details, but the core was the same. Mason Carter, the war hero turned maintenance man, had once been investigated for violent conduct while in the Marines. In her corner office, Catherine stared at the screen. The article was sparse, quoting an unnamed source close to one of the original candidates for Kira's French tutor. The candidate in question was no mystery. Arthur Bellamy, venture capitalist, polo player, and one of the 5 men she had considered before Kira's elevator moment. He had always made his interest in Catherine's business connections clear, and his disdain for her choice in Mason even clearer. Claire stood beside her, tablet in hand. "It's already trending. Bellamy's people aren't denying they leaked it." "Because they think they can kill his credibility," Catherine muttered. She closed the laptop with more force than necessary. "And by extension, mine." "What's the truth?" Claire asked carefully. Catherine's jaw tightened. "That's the problem. I don't know the full truth." That afternoon, she found Mason repairing a hallway radiator, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair damp from the steam. "We need to talk," she said. He straightened slowly, sensing the shift in her tone. "About? You've seen the news." "Yeah." His voice was even, almost too even. "And?" "Tell me it's not true." His eyes met hers, steady, unreadable. "It's not. But that doesn't mean the story will go away. It happened in Helmand Province, a misunderstanding during a joint training. An Afghan interpreter tripped during a drill. My unit thought he was under attack. I stepped in, tried to break it up, but someone got hurt in the chaos. I was investigated, cleared. The report was sealed." Catherine crossed her arms. "Then why is it out now?" "Because someone wants it out," Mason said simply. She hesitated, the weight of public image pressing against her better instincts. "Mason, until this blows over, I think it's best if you take some time. Away from Kira." For the first time, she saw the flicker of hurt in his eyes, but he only nodded once. "Understood." When Kira came home that evening, Catherine broke the news gently, telling her Mason wouldn't be around for a while. The girl froze in the doorway. "Why?" "Because some people," Catherine began. "Some people lie," Kira snapped. "Kira! No!" Her voice cracked, the betrayal raw. "He wouldn't hurt anyone, I know it." She turned and stormed to her room, the slam of her door echoing through the house. The next day at school, while other kids shuffled between classes, Kira slipped into the library. She wasn't allowed into the archives, but Mrs. Whitmore, the librarian, had always liked her. "I need to look up a news article from the military," Kira said, carefully vague. Mrs. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "For a project?" Kira nodded. "A very important one." It took the better part of an hour, piecing together fragments from old databases and veterans' forums. But there it was. A brief, dusty record of the incident. The official note was clear. Carter, M., cleared of all charges. Incident ruled as operational miscommunication. Her chest swelled with both relief and indignation. She printed the record, folding it neatly into her pocket. That evening, she found her mother in the study. Catherine looked up from her paperwork to see the folded paper thrust toward her. "It's right there," Kira said. "It was a misunderstanding. The military said so. So why did you tell him to leave?" Catherine read the clipped report, her throat tightening. "Because Because you care more about what people think than the truth. The words stung more than Catherine wanted to admit. She set the paper down. Kira, it's not that simple. Yes, it is, the girl said, her voice low but fierce. You tell me to stand up for what's right. Well, this is right. In his apartment across town, Mason sat at his small kitchen table, staring at the unopened envelope in front of him. It was a letter to his daughter, his real daughter, telling her about the work he'd been doing with Kira. He hadn't decided whether to send it. Outside, the rain began again, soft against the glass. He told himself the quiet was better, easier. But in the stillness, he realized the park had felt different with Kira there. The lesson about patience and observation hadn't been just for her. It had been for him, too. This was the valley of the sine wave, the low before any climb. The warmth of the park was replaced by the cold edges of rumor and doubt. But in that low, seeds were planted. Seeds that, when the moment came, would push hard toward the light. Rain had fallen all morning, drumming against Catherine's office windows, turning the skyline into a blurred watercolor of gray and steel. She had asked Mason to meet her privately. No cameras, no staff, just the two of them. When he arrived, he looked the same as always. Plain jacket, worn boots, hair still damp from the weather. But there was a weight in his posture, as if he already knew what this meeting was about. Catherine gestured toward a chair. Thank you for coming. Mason stayed standing. You wanted answers. I need them, she corrected. That report Kira found. Yes, it clears you legally. But I still don't understand. If you were innocent, why did you leave the Marines? Why? Walk away from everything you trained for. He took a slow breath, as if deciding how much truth to hand over. Because being clear doesn't mean being right, she frowned, waiting. It was Helmand Province, 2011, he began. His voice was low, almost flat. We were running a joint operation with local forces. There was bad intel. Someone told us a weapons cache was hidden in a cluster of civilian homes. I was team lead. I made the call to push forward. His eyes went distant, unfocused, as if replaying the scene. Turned out the cache didn't exist. But in the chaos, one of my men panicked and fired. No one died, but a young interpreter was injured. He was just in the wrong place, and it was my call that put him there. Catherine's brow softened. But the investigation said I followed protocol, Mason cut in. And I did. But protocol doesn't wipe blood off your hands, Catherine. It doesn't erase the look in that kid's eyes when he realized it was friendly fire. I walked away because I couldn't trust myself to make the right call again. I walked away before I made a worse mistake. He stepped back, crossing his arms. I've made peace with the fact that I'm not the hero some people think I am. But I'm not letting a kid I barely know look at me like I'm something I'm not. I won't be her fake hero. The room was quiet except for the steady hum of the rain. Catherine studied him, realizing there was no self-pity in his tone, only a stubborn kind of honesty that was harder to face than denial. You think that makes you unfit to teach her? She asked. I think it makes me human, he replied. But people don't always want human. They want flawless. From the doorway, a small voice broke in. I don't. Both turned. Kira stood there, raincoat still on, her hair damp and clinging to her cheeks. Neither of them had noticed her come in. She walked into the room, her gaze fixed on Mason. I don't want flawless. I don't need perfect. I just need someone who's real. Kira, Catherine started, but the girl shook her head. I heard everything, she said, voice steady. You made a mistake. You owned it. That's what matters. You teach me French, but you also teach me other stuff, like how to help people, how to notice things. That's real. She took a step closer to Mason. And I'd rather have a real teacher than one who just looks good in a brochure. For a long moment, Mason didn't answer. His gaze dropped to the floor, then back to her. There was something in his expression Catherine hadn't seen before. Maybe gratitude, maybe a faint crack in the armor he always wore. "You're a stubborn kid," he said finally. "So are you," Kira shot back, but her smile softened the words. Catherine exhaled slowly, as if the tension in the room had shifted just enough to let her breathe again. "Well," she said, glancing between them, "it seems I'm outnumbered." Mason's mouth twitched in the ghost of a smile. "This doesn't mean I'm saying yes," Kira grinned. "Not yet." Outside, the rain had eased into a mist, the kind that clung to the skin but didn't soak. Catherine watched them walk toward the elevator together, still teacher and student, but with an unspoken agreement hanging between them. It wasn't a clean resolution, not yet, but the fracture lines in the trust between them had started to close, and for Mason, who had spent years convinced he didn't deserve that kind of trust again, it was more than he'd expected. The first notice came in a plain white envelope, the kind that could carry anything from a credit card offer to a summons. Mason didn't need to open it to know it was from the court. His custody hearing was 2 weeks away, and his lawyer had warned him, without steady income, without a respectable title, his chances of regaining regular visitation with Emily were slim. He stared at the envelope in his hand, the paper soft from being handled too much. He could hear the faint echo of Emily's voice from the last time they'd spoken over the phone, hesitant, polite, like talking to a distant relative instead of a father. He had promised her that next time they met, it wouldn't be in a supervised room. But promises without stability were just words, and words didn't sway judges. Across the city, Catherine sat in the glass-walled conference room of her company's headquarters. The long table was crowded with faces she knew too well, board members, investors, advisors, each carrying a different kind of impatience. "This community investment project is bleeding money," Arthur Bellamy said, leaning back in his chair. "It's been 6 months and no measurable return. And now, with the publicity surrounding your new hire, the project's credibility is under question." Catherine's grip tightened around her pen. "It's not a new hire. Mason isn't part of this project." Arthur's smile was thin. "Public perception doesn't make that distinction, and perception is everything, Catherine." The subtext was clear. Arthur had never stopped disapproving of Mason, and now he was using the stalled community development deal as leverage. The message was simple: drop Mason from her personal life, salvage the project, and keep the shareholders happy. Later that afternoon, Mason sat in the school's small maintenance shed, the scent of oil and metal heavy in the air. Kira had brought in an old, rust-speckled bicycle she'd found in the corner of the gym storage. "It's too small for me," she said, brushing dust off the handlebars. "But it's the only one with a basket." Mason crouched beside it, turning the pedals slowly. "Where'd you find this relic?" "In the gym. Mr. Harris was going to throw it out." "Figures," Mason muttered. "People toss things the minute they stop shining." He reached for a wrench, loosening the chain. Kira sat cross-legged on the floor, watching his hands move with steady precision. "You're really good at fixing stuff." "I've had a lot of practice," he said. "Most things in life, whether it's a bike or a person, you don't just replace when they break. You figure out what's wrong, you work at it, and maybe it works again. Sometimes it doesn't, but you try anyway." "Is that what you did in the Marines?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, but I learned it more from failing than from winning." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Mason wiped his hands on a rag. "There was a time I thought I could muscle through anything, fix everything if I just worked harder. But some problems aren't about effort. They're about timing, about knowing when to hold on and when to let go." Kira frowned thoughtfully. "Are you talking about your daughter?" He met her gaze, surprised. "You've been listening more than I thought." "I listen when it matters," she said quietly. That evening, Catherine stopped by the maintenance shed on her way out. She found Mason and Kira side by side, tightening the bolts on the bike's front wheel. There was a smear of grease across Kira's cheek, and Mason had the ghost of a smile he didn't seem to notice. "How's the patient?" Catherine asked, nodding at the bike. "Almost good as new," Mason said, giving the wheel a final spin. Kira beamed. "It's going to be perfect for carrying books." Catherine's phone buzzed. Another message from her assistant. Another warning about the board's growing dissatisfaction. She slipped it back into her bag, but the weight of it remained. That night, in her apartment, Catherine reviewed the numbers on the community investment deal. It was designed to revitalize a struggling neighborhood, one she believed could become a hub for education and small business. But the delays in permits, combined with pressure from investors, threatened to gut the plan entirely. And with Arthur whispering about Mason's bad influence, she could see how easily they could corner her into a choice she didn't want to make. She closed the laptop and poured herself a glass of water, wondering if Mason knew just how many battles he was fighting. Some he hadn't even seen yet. In his own apartment, Mason pulled Emily's photograph from the small wooden box he kept by the bed. Her hair was longer now, her smile a little different. The custody hearing loomed in his mind like a storm he couldn't outrun. The truth was, he needed the work with Kira, not just for the money, but because it was the first thing in years that felt like he was building something instead of patching holes. But with the court looking for proof of stability and Catherine under pressure to cut ties, both his personal and professional fights seemed to be running on the same track, heading toward a collision. For now, he focused on what he could control. The bike's chain was clean, the tires were patched, and tomorrow, Kira would ride it across the schoolyard with the same determination she had in her voice when she defended him. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep going one more day. The spring field trip had started like any other. A convoy of yellow school buses pulling out of the parking lot, parents waving from the sidewalk, children chattering about picnic lunches and river views. Catherine had signed the permission slip herself, though Mason wasn't on the chaperone list. He'd been suspended from teaching Kira after the board's last round of pressure, and he'd taken the hint to stay away. But mid-morning, as he was tightening a loose hinge in the school maintenance shed, his phone buzzed. The caller ID read Ms. Patel, 5th grade. Her voice was shaky. "Mason, it's the bus. We're stuck. On the Riverside Bridge. The brakes failed, and we're angled too close to the guardrail. The kids are panicking." He didn't wait for the rest. "Which bus?" "Number 3. I know where you are," he said, already grabbing his jacket and sprinting for his truck. The Riverside Bridge arched over the churning brown water of the Hudson, and the wind cut across it in sharp gusts. Mason spotted the bus immediately, tilted slightly, hazard lights blinking. A patrol car had just arrived, but the officer was still setting up cones, his radio crackling with requests for backup. Mason didn't ask permission. He jogged up the side of the bridge, yanked the bus door lever, and stepped inside. The air was thick with fear. Dozens of wide-eyed faces turned toward him, some streaked with tears. The driver was on the radio, his knuckles white on the wheel. Kira sat halfway down the aisle, clutching her backpack to her chest. 2 rows behind her, a boy Mason recognized, Ethan Bellamy, the son of Arthur Bellamy, one of Catherine's most vocal critics, was trembling so hard his teeth chattered. Mason crouched beside the first row, switching to French without thinking. "Respirez doucement. Comme souffler une bougie." Breathe slowly, like blowing out a candle. The closest child blinked at him, then mimicked the slow exhale. Mason moved row by row, repeating the words, keeping his voice steady. Low, calm. The sound of the engine's cooling fan and the occasional gust outside were the only interruptions. He reached Ethan, whose face was pale and rigid. Tu es en sécurité, Mason murmured. Je suis là. You're safe. I'm here. The boy's lips trembled, but he nodded, gripping Mason's wrist for just a second before letting go. Behind him, the driver called. They're bringing another bus. Just 5 minutes. 5 minutes was forever to a frightened child. Mason kept moving, checking seatbelts, making sure the younger ones weren't climbing over the seats. Kira caught his eye once, her expression a mixture of pride and relief. The rescue bus finally arrived, its door clanging open as a firefighter stepped on board. Mason didn't leave until the last child was safely on the pavement, her hand swallowed in the firefighter's glove. By the time he stepped off the bridge, Catherine was there, her heels clicking across the asphalt. She didn't speak, just placed a hand on his arm, her eyes searching his face for any sign he was hurt. "I'm fine," he said. "They're all fine." The next morning, headlines blazed across local news sites. Suspended school worker saves, busload of children. Marine veteran turns hero on Riverside Bridge. Even national outlets picked it up. Photos of Mason guiding children down the bus steps went viral, some cropped to highlight the moment Ethan Bellamy clung to him. At the coffee shop, people clapped him on the back. Parents he'd never met shook his hand. Reporters called his phone non-stop. But Mason felt the weight of it pressing down. When Catherine found him in the maintenance shed that evening, he was sitting on a stool, polishing the wrench he hadn't gotten around to using that morning. "They're calling you a hero," she said. He didn't look up. "They can call me whatever they want. I did what anyone should have done." "Not everyone would have gone onto that bridge," she countered. He finally met her gaze. "Then maybe that's the problem." Catherine stepped closer, her voice softening. "Mason, you saved Ethan Bellamy. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand it means his father will probably hate me less. Until he remembers I'm still the maintenance guy who teaches his rival's kid French." Kira appeared in the doorway, her cheeks flushed from the chill outside. "They're wrong, you know," she said. "It's not that you should have done it. It's that you could. And you did." He gave a small shake of his head, but there was the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. "Get some rest," Catherine told him, as she and Kira turned to leave. When the door closed, Mason leaned back against the wall, staring at the silent tools hanging in neat rows. The bridge, the shaking kids, the wind, all of it still echoed in his mind. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had done the bare minimum. But for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, the bare minimum had still made a difference. The late afternoon light slanted through the school's maintenance garage, turning the dust in the air to tiny golden flecks. Mason was tightening the chain on Kira's refurbished bike when the shadow of a man filled the doorway. "Mason Clark," the voice called, low and gravelly. Mason straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. The man who stepped inside was broader now, a little heavier in the face, but Mason knew him instantly. "Sullivan," he said, almost under his breath. They hadn't seen each other in over a decade, not since Helmand Province. The last time Mason remembered Sullivan's face, it had been washed in desert dust, jaw tight as the medevac chopper lifted off. "What are you doing here?" Mason asked. Sullivan shut the door, glancing around the empty garage. "I read about the bus, figured it was time we talked." Mason went back to the bike chain, voice even. "We said everything that needed saying back then." "No," Sullivan said, stepping closer. "You said everything. You made sure no one else had to." Mason's hand stilled on the chain. He looked up, eyes narrowing. "Don't." "You took the hit for something you didn't do," Sullivan pressed. "It wasn't your intel that went bad. It wasn't your call to push forward. That was on Captain Dwyer, and you knew what would happen if the report named him." Mason's jaw tightened. He had 2 kids. His wife was in chemo. If they'd stripped his benefits, So you let them strip yours instead, Sullivan finished. Silence filled the space between them, heavy with the weight of what neither had said for years. Catherine's voice cut into the quiet. What's going on? Neither man had heard her approach. She stood just inside the doorway, her expression caught somewhere between curiosity and concern. Sullivan gave a small nod. You must be Catherine. She looked from him to Mason. You going to explain? Mason hesitated, but Sullivan spoke first. Your friend here isn't telling you everything about why he left the Marines. He walked away to protect someone else's family, someone who outranked him. He took the black mark so that man's record stayed clean, so his kids would still have a roof over their heads. Catherine's gaze sharpened on Mason. Is that true? Mason shrugged, as if it were nothing more than an old rumor. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me, she said quietly. And it would matter to Kira. He turned away, busying himself with the bike chain again. I'm not telling Kira. She doesn't need to see me as some kind of martyr. I made a choice. I live with it. Sullivan let out a long breath. You've always been like that. Too stubborn to admit when you've done something decent. He clapped a hand on Mason's shoulder. If you ever change your mind, you know where to find me. With that, he left, the door swinging shut behind him. Catherine stepped closer. You realize you've been walking around all these years carrying a story that isn't yours to carry? Mason didn't look up. It was mine the second I signed the report. And you think that makes you less worthy to teach my daughter? She asked. He finally met her eyes, a flicker of something unguarded, breaking through his usual calm. I think it makes me exactly what I am. Someone who knows what it costs to protect people. And someone who's not sure he'd survive it a second time. For a moment, Catherine didn't answer. She just studied him, the quiet strength, the self-imposed exile, the choices that had shaped him. In her world, sacrifice was often measured in dollar signs. His was written in silence, in the willingness to be misunderstood forever. She spoke softly. Mason, you didn't just act with courage. You acted with love. And maybe it's time you let someone see that. The golden light in the garage had deepened to amber, and the air smelled faintly of rain drifting in from somewhere outside. Mason gave the bike chain one last turn, then set the wrench down. I'll think about it, he said. But Catherine saw it, the faint shift in his shoulders, the smallest crack in the armor. He might never call himself a hero, but she understood now. He didn't need the title. His life was already proof enough. The letter from the court arrived in a plain white envelope, but Mason felt its weight before he even opened it. Sitting at the small kitchen table of his apartment, he slid a calloused finger under the flap and unfolded the single page. The words blurred for a moment before sharpening into focus. Final hearing in 2 weeks. Evidence of stable income required. 2 weeks. 14 days to prove he could give his daughter a home again. 14 days to find something permanent in a life that had been anything but. At the same time, across the city, Catherine was pacing her glass-walled office. Her assistant read from the agenda. The annual press conference is locked for the end of next week. The board expects you to announce Kira's official French teacher on stage, part of the new cultural initiative. Catherine's jaw tightened. She knew the board's subtext. They wanted someone photogenic, credentialed, the kind of polished hire who would make headlines in glossy magazines. Mason didn't fit that profile. He didn't want to. And yet, after everything, she couldn't imagine announcing anyone else. That afternoon, Catherine and Mason crossed paths at the school courtyard. The fall air carried the scent of dry leaves and faint wood smoke. You got something on your mind, she said, reading his face before he could speak. He handed her the court letter. She scanned it quickly. 2 weeks, she murmured. 2 weeks, he confirmed. Without proof of steady income, the judge will side with my ex-wife. And steady doesn't mean patching pipes and replacing light bulbs when they call me in. It means a contract, a paycheck I can count on. And you think teaching Kira could be that job? She asked. It could, Mason admitted, but I don't want charity. Catherine's gaze softened. It wouldn't be charity if you earned it. Later that evening, as she reviewed her calendar for the press conference, her phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from a number she recognized. Lance McKenna, one of her largest investors. If you go through with hiring that janitor as Kira's tutor, I'll pull my $50 million from the Harborfront project. Your call. Catherine stared at the words. The Harborfront redevelopment wasn't just another investment. It was a long-promised community revitalization, thousands of jobs, and her legacy project. Losing McKenna's funding would put everything at risk. She sank into her chair, the city lights flickering outside her office window. The next day, she met Mason at a small cafe off Main Street. No assistants, no reporters, just coffee and the sound of rain against the awning. There's something you need to know, she began, setting her cup down. If I make you Kira's official tutor at the press conference, I'll lose a major investor. It could cripple a project I've been working on for years. Mason leaned back, his expression unreadable. So don't do it. It's not that simple, she said. The Harborfront project would create real change for people. Affordable housing, schools, jobs. Sounds like you've already decided, he said quietly. Catherine's eyes searched his. I haven't. But I have to be honest about the stakes. A few tables away, Kira was working on her French vocabulary, oblivious to the undercurrent between them. She looked up and called, Mason, what's the French word for bridge? He smiled faintly. Pont. Like the one we walked over last week, she asked. Exactly. Catherine watched the exchange, realizing how natural it felt, how Kira's confidence had grown since meeting him. But the decision looming over her wasn't about what felt right. It was about what she could live with. As they left the cafe, Mason paused at the curb. Whatever you decide, Catherine, don't do it for me. Do it for her. And do it in a way you can sleep at night. She nodded, but his words echoed in her head long after he'd walked away into the mist. 2 clocks were ticking now. His fight for his daughter, her decision about Kira's future. And both deadlines were moving closer with every breath. The ballroom glittered under 1,000 warm lights, chandeliers casting a golden haze over the polished marble floor. Rows of cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Catherine stood at the podium, her voice steady as she welcomed the audience. The annual Cultural Initiative Conference had always been a high-profile affair, but this year, the stakes were sharper, the air tighter. 5 chairs stood in a neat row on stage. In them sat the 5 finalists for Kira's French tutor position, 3 acclaimed linguists, 1 best-selling author of children's language books, and Mason. Each wore their best attire, though Mason's was simply a pressed shirt and blazer borrowed from a friend. Let's hear from our candidates, Catherine announced. One by one, they took turns at the microphone. The first, a professor from the Sorbonne, spoke with crisp authority about immersive learning methods and international accolades. The second showcased a slideshow of celebrity students she had taught. The third touted her multilingual education program adopted by several elite schools. The fourth, a silver-haired gentleman with a poet's cadence, read an excerpt from his award-winning book. Polite applause followed each, the kind given when people admire credentials but feel no real connection. Then it was Mason's turn. He walked to the podium without notes. His voice was low, but carried easily through the room. When you teach a language, he began, you're not just teaching words. You're planting seeds. Seeds of understanding, empathy, and respect. You're giving someone a new way to see the world. He paused, letting the quiet settle. I've taught in classrooms and in the field. I've taught Marines who needed to speak with local villagers. And I've taught my own daughter, before life put distance between us. What I've learned is that language, when taught with kindness, doesn't just connect people, it changes them. My hope isn't just for Kira to speak French fluently, it's for her to see people differently, to carry that compassion wherever she goes. No list of awards, no PowerPoint, just the kind of truth that landed straight in the chest. The applause was warmer this time, though not unanimous. From the second row, Lance McKenna's jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on Catherine. Before she could thank Mason, movement from the audience caught her eye. Kira was slipping from her seat, making her way up the side steps onto the stage. "Kira," Catherine began, but the girl was already at Mason's side, her small hand finding his. "This is my teacher," Kira said into the microphone, her voice clear despite the sudden hush in the room. "I don't care what his job was before. I don't care if he doesn't have fancy awards. I've learned more from him in a few weeks than I could in years with anyone else. And I don't want anyone else." The silence was deafening, heavy with the weight of unspoken opinions. Then a voice sliced through it, from the investors section. "Are you really planning," McKenna's voice boomed, "to hand your daughter's education to an unemployed veteran with no standing in our world?" Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Every camera turned toward Catherine. She stepped forward, her heels sharp against the stage floor, and took the microphone from its stand. "No," she said, letting the word hang for a beat. "I'm not handing her education to an unemployed veteran." McKenna's eyes glinted with triumph until she continued. "I'm entrusting her to the one person who has shown her what it means to be a good human being, because I would rather my daughter learn kindness and courage than perfect pronunciation from someone who has neither." The room erupted, some in applause, others in disapproving whispers. The flash of cameras was relentless. Mason stood motionless beside Kira, unsure if he'd just been given a lifeline or thrown into deeper waters. Catherine looked at him, her expression steady. "Mason Clark will be Kira's tutor. And if anyone thinks that makes me reckless, then you've never understood what this initiative is truly about." For the first time that night, Mason felt the ground beneath him shift, not in danger, but in possibility. And somewhere deep inside, he knew the clock on his custody fight was still ticking. But maybe, just maybe, he'd found an ally who could help him beat it. The ruling came on a Thursday morning, the kind of autumn day when the air feels clean and full of promise. Mason stood outside the courthouse, his hands in his jacket pockets, trying to read the judge's final words in his mind before they were even spoken. Catherine and Kira stood a few feet away, waiting with him. When the clerk finally emerged, handing Mason the official document, he barely registered the legal jargon, his eyes locked on the one sentence that mattered. "The petitioner is granted visitation rights with his daughter every Saturday." For a long moment he couldn't speak. His throat tightened, his chest full to the point of aching. Catherine simply placed a hand on his shoulder. No words needed. A week later, they met in the park. The same park where he had first been coaxed into teaching Kira, where kindness had sprouted in unexpected soil. The afternoon sun filtered through the turning leaves, painting the grass in gold and amber. Kira was already there, sprawled on a picnic blanket with her French workbook open. Next to her sat a girl with the same stubborn chin as Mason, and eyes that mirrored his own, his daughter, Lily. She clutched a sketchbook, shyly watching him approach. And there was Catherine, in a simple sweater and jeans, pouring lemonade into paper cups, like it was the most natural thing in the world to share this space with him. Mason lowered himself onto the blanket, glancing at Lily, unsure if she would remember the way they once read bedtime stories together. She tilted her head, curious, but not afraid. He cleared his throat. "All right, ladies," he said with a faint smile. "Today's French lesson starts with something very important." Kira grinned knowingly, sensing what was coming. Mason looked at Lily, then at Kira. "Respire, petite, comme souffler les bougies d'anniversaire." Breathe, little one, like blowing out birthday candles. Kira's eyes sparkled. Lily's lips curved into a slow, cautious smile. Catherine, sitting just beyond them, leaned back on her hands, watching the scene unfold with a quiet warmth that needed no translation. They practiced the phrase together, the girls giggling as Mason exaggerated the souffler, cheeks puffing until they laughed too hard to continue. A jogger slowed nearby, smiling at the unlikely quartet. Two children, a veteran-turned teacher, and a billionaire CEO, sharing the simplest kind of afternoon. It wasn't the kind of family Mason had once pictured, but as the sunlight settled on their little circle, he realized it might be something better. As they packed up, Catherine caught his eye. "You know," she said softly, "a few months ago, I thought I knew exactly the kind of person I wanted in Kira's life. Someone polished, credentialed, safe." "And now?" Mason asked. "Now, I know safe doesn't always mean right. Sometimes the right person is the one who's been through the fire, come out with a few scars, and still chooses to be kind." Mason held her gaze for a moment, the weight of her words settling between them like a promise. The four of them walked toward the park gate, the girls skipping ahead, their laughter carried by the breeze. Mason felt the pull of old wounds, but for the first time in years, they didn't define him. He wasn't just a veteran. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a father, a teacher, a man who had been given the rare chance to rebuild, not just for himself, but for the people who mattered most. And maybe, in this unexpected constellation of lives, they were all starting a new chapter. One that began not with fear in a darkened elevator, but with sunlight, open air, and the shared belief that people can change. Because sometimes, to find the right person, you have to break past the walls of prejudice, including the ones you've built yourself. Mason glanced ahead at Lily and Kira, their heads bent together over a shared joke, and felt the corners of his mouth lift. The park path curved toward the horizon, and for the first time in years, he was eager to see where it led. The sun dipped lower, bathing them in a final wash of gold. And as they walked on, they looked, just for a moment, like a family already halfway home. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Share your city or country in the comments. It's always a joy to see how far our stories travel. If today's story touched your heart, consider subscribing so you'll never miss the next chapter of kindness and hope. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Your presence here means more than words can say, and I hope you leave with a little more warmth in your heart than when you arrived.